The journey had been long, and the air was thick with the warmth of the Nigerian evening. Wamba and Danso stepped out, the palace's towering walls casting shadows on the courtyard. Wamba stretched, feeling the weight of the road lift from his shoulders. Beside him, Danso stood stiffly, his royal posture never quite leaving him. Before Wamba could say a word, a figure came racing from the side, light as a bird, arms flung wide. "Wamba!" The sound was full of laughter, joy spilling over with each breath. It was Arewa, Wamba's younger sister, her small feet barely touching the ground as she ran into his arms, crashing into him with such force that they almost toppled. Wamba caught her, grinning as she wrapped her arms tightly around him. "Arewa, you'll knock us both over!" Arewa's excitement was contagious, her words tumbling out in a rush as she bounced with energy. "You're back. I missed you so much. It's been forever. Did you bring me anything? Tell me about the school. Oh, who's this?" Wamba, still catching his breath, gently pried her off him and turned her toward Danso. "Arewa, this is Danso. He's a friend of mine. He'll be staying with us for the holidays." Arewa's smile faded, her bright eyes narrowing as she looked Danso up and down. Something about him, though she couldn't place it, made her instantly wary. "I don't like him," she said, crossing her arms with a pout. Wamba laughed, though the sudden tension made him feel uneasy. "You've only just met him," he said, ruffling her hair. "Give him a chance." But Arewa shook her head stubbornly, her eyes still fixed on Danso. She didn't know why, but something in her heart told her she wasn't ready to trust him just yet. Danso, used to cold receptions, said nothing. He merely stood by Wamba's side, his face unreadable. Wamba sighed inwardly. It seemed even at home, Danso had a mountain to climb. "Come on, we should go inside," Wamba said softly. He glanced at Danso and squeezed his hand for a moment, trying to offer comfort. Then, together, they walked toward the palace, leaving behind the stillness of the courtyard. The grand hall of King Adebayo's palace was filled with a sense of grandeur. Its red brick walls rising high with elegant carvings and golden light spilling from the lamps above, casting a warm glow across the marble floor. Wamba's heart raced with excitement as he stepped inside after so many months away. He was home, and the familiar sight of his parents standing in their places, his father, King Adebayo, seated on his throne, and Kwame by his side, filled him with a sense of warmth. As soon as Kwame saw him, a broad smile spread across his face, his eyes lighting up with joy. "Wamba!" Kwame's voice was filled with happiness as he stepped forward, arms open. Wamba rushed into his father's embrace, the warmth of his touch grounding him after the long months apart. "I've missed you both so much," Wamba said, his voice catching slightly. King Adebayo rose from his throne and pulled Wamba into a strong hug. The king's deep voice rumbled, "It's good to have you home, son." For a moment, all was right. The warmth of being back in his family's arms washed over Wamba, and he was lost in the comfort of being home. But then, Kwame's gaze shifted, and his expression changed. His eyes landed on Danso, who stood just behind Wamba, and confusion clouded his face. "What is he doing here?" Kwame asked, his tone puzzled and sharp. Danso froze under the weight of Kwame's words, his shoulders tensing. The memory of their last meeting in Ghana flashed in his mind, the harsh words he had spoken, the look of hurt on Kwame's face. He had carried the guilt of that day ever since. Now, standing before Kwame again, it felt even heavier. Wamba turned to Danso, giving him a gentle nudge. "This is your chance," he whispered, his voice soft yet encouraging. "You need to talk to him." Danso swallowed hard, then stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "I came to apologize," he said, his eyes not meeting Kwame's at first. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have said all those things to you." The room grew quiet. King Adebayo watched silently, his expression unreadable, as Kwame crossed his arms and stared at Danso. There was a long pause before Kwame finally spoke, his voice still guarded. "Words can hurt, Danso," he said. "Apologies don't make them disappear." Danso's heart sank, but he stood his ground. "I know," he said quietly, "but I truly am sorry." Kwame studied him for a moment longer before nodding slightly, though his expression remained uncertain. "It will take time," he muttered. Wamba stepped forward, his voice steady as he spoke up. "Danso is staying with us for the holidays," he said, turning to his parents. "I invited him. He's my friend." Kwame's eyes narrowed in confusion. "Friend?" he repeated, glancing between Wamba and Danso. He remembered the last time these two had seen each other. There had been nothing but tension, harsh words and blows. But now they stood side by side, speaking as if they had become close. It puzzled him deeply, but he chose not to question it further, at least not now. Obviously, a lot had happened at the school. "Well, if that's what you've decided," Kwame finally said, "he's welcome here, but don't think that everything is forgotten." Wamba nodded in understanding, grateful that his parents had not turned Danso away. As he turned to leave the hall with Danso, his heart should have been lighter, but something held it down. For a brief moment, Wamba glanced back at his parents, expecting to see them standing close as they always had. But instead, there was a space between them, a gap that felt too wide. The small, tender gestures, the playful smiles, the closeness they usually shared, it wasn't there. His fathers didn't even look at each other. Wamba's chest tightened with worry. What had changed in his absence? Kwame's voice broke the silence. "Go on, show your friend to his room," he said softly. "It's been a long journey." Wamba nodded and led Danso out of the grand hall, but his mind lingered on the subtle distance between his parents. Something was different, and it scared him more than he could put into words. Later that evening, the palace had quieted. The halls, once filled with the sound of servants and guests, now hummed softly with the sound of night. Danso sat in his assigned room, the bed large and unfamiliar, the walls adorned with fine tapestries. He had expected to feel awe in a place like this, an elegant palace in a foreign land, but instead, all he felt was restlessness. The apology to Kwame weighed on his mind, and though he had spoken the words, they felt incomplete. Will things ever go back to the way they once were between him and Kwame? A soft knock on his door broke his thoughts. "Danso," Wamba's voice was barely a whisper. "Come in," Danso called softly, and the door creaked open. Wamba slipped into the room, a small smile on his face. He moved with quiet grace, but there was something playful in his eyes. Without hesitation, Wamba crossed the room and sat beside Danso on the bed. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Danso shook his head, his eyes flickering toward the window where the moon cast a pale light across the floor. "Too much to think about." Wamba nodded, leaning back on his hands as he stretched out his legs. "Yeah, it's been a long day." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension. After a moment, he spoke again. "You know, Kwame will come around. He just needs time." Danso sighed, his chest heavy. "I don't know. I said terrible things to him, things I didn't even mean." Wamba looked at him, his eyes soft with understanding. "We all say things we regret sometimes, but you're here now. That means something." Danso turned his head, his gaze meeting Wamba's. The room felt smaller, quieter, like the rest of the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them. "You really think so?" Danso asked, his voice lower now. Wamba smiled gently, his hand reaching out to rest on Danso's arm. Yeah, I do. His touch was light, comforting, and Danso felt a warmth spread through him. For a moment, they sat in silence, the night air cool around them. Then, Wamba's voice broke the quiet once more, softer this time. I'm glad you're here, Danso. Danso's heart skipped a beat. The sincerity in Wamba's words touched something deep inside him. He wanted to say something, to tell Wamba how much it meant to him, how much he had come to care for him, but the words felt tangled in his throat. Instead, he reached out, pulling Wamba closer until they were lying side by side on the bed. Wamba's body was warm against his, and as they lay there in the stillness, everything else seemed to fall away. The palace, the tension, the uncertainty. It was just them. I don't know what I'd do without you, Danso whispered, the confession slipping out before he could stop it. Wamba turned his head slightly, his face inches from Danso's. You don't have to think about that, he said, his voice just as soft. I'm here. Danso smiled, a small, tender smile, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. They lay there for a while, wrapped in each other's warmth, their breaths slowing as exhaustion from the long journey finally crept in. Before sleep could fully claim him, Wamba whispered one last thing, his voice filled with affection. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Danso's heart swelled, and with a contented sigh, he closed his eyes. The day had been full of challenges, but here, in this quiet moment, everything felt right. For the first time in what seemed like forever, he drifted into sleep with a sense of belonging, wrapped in Wamba's embrace. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft golden hues across the room. Wamba was already awake, sitting by the edge of the bed, his eyes bright with excitement. Danso stirred, blinking sleepily at the light before noticing Wamba's eager expression. What are you so excited about? Danso mumbled, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Wamba grinned. I want to show you something. We're going out today, just the two of us. Danso stretched, his muscles sore from the previous day's journey. Where are we going? Wamba smiled, his tone playful and secretive. You'll see. But first, you need to change, and you can't wear your usual clothes. Danso glanced down at himself, realizing he was still in his nightclothes. He thought of the fine garments he'd brought with him, all stored away in the wardrobe. What's wrong with my usual clothes? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Wamba shook his head, rummaging through a small bag at the foot of the bed. He pulled out a simple shirt and trousers, the kind worn by common folk, and tossed them to Danso. You don't want to wear those royal clothes where we're going. Trust me. Danso looked at the clothes in confusion, holding the rough fabric between his fingers. Why do I need to wear this? Wamba smirked, leaning casually against the bedpost. Because you don't want to stand out. Just go with it. Danso hesitated for a moment, unused to such plain clothing. Growing up in luxury, he had always been dressed in the finest garments, not something as humble as this. But he loved Wamba, and the idea of disappointing him made his discomfort seem trivial. Sighing, he quickly freshened up and then reluctantly dressed in the simple outfit. Wamba's eyes sparkled with amusement as he watched Danso adjust the loose shirt, fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar style. You look good, he teased. Almost like the clothes belong to you. Danso frowned, tugging at the fabric. I'm not sure about this. Wamba chuckled and grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the door. You'll be fine. Let's go. They slipped out of the palace, avoiding the main gate and instead making their way to the back, where a tall stone wall bordered the grounds. Danso stopped in his tracks, eyeing the wall with suspicion. Why aren't we just walking through the gate? He asked, crossing his arms. Wamba flashed him a mischievous grin. Because it's more fun this way. Danso shook his head. I'm not climbing that wall. Wamba's grin widened. You scared? Danso's eyes narrowed. I'm not scared. Well then, prove it, Wamba teased, already scaling the wall with ease. He reached the top and looked down at Danso, his grin challenging. Come on, Prince, show me what you've got. Danso groaned, but refused to back down. He climbed up after Wamba, his movements less graceful but determined. Once he reached the top, Wamba laughed softly and helped him down the other side. I didn't know climbing walls was part of your daily routine, Danso muttered, dusting himself off. Wamba smiled and shrugged. I grew up here, had to find ways to make life interesting. And well, the reason I can climb that wall so well is because when Arewa and I lived on the streets, I used to sneak into the palace to steal food and whatever we needed. A fleeting sadness crossed his face, his voice dipping as the memories surfaced. Danso squeezed his hand gently, grounding him in the moment. Wamba blinked, then shook off the heaviness with a spark of excitement. Let's go, he said, his energy returning as he pulled Danso forward. They walked through narrow alleyways, the streets bustling with people going about their daily lives. For Danso, it was a new world, one filled with the smells of street food, the sounds of laughter and haggling, and the sight of children running barefoot through the streets. It was raw and real, unlike the polished walls of the palace. Wamba led Danso to a crumbling house on the edge of town. The walls were cracked and the roof sagged as if the weight of years had taken their toll. This is where I grew up, Wamba said quietly, his tone different now, softer, more reflective. Danso stared at the house, the reality of Wamba's life hitting him harder than he expected. He had always known Wamba's background was different, but standing here in front of the remnants of his childhood, Danso realized just how different their lives had been. Wamba's voice broke the silence. It wasn't much, but it was home. My parents, they did their best. Danso's heart ached. He could feel the weight of Wamba's memories, the hardship he had faced, and yet here he was, strong, resilient, and filled with life. Danso's throat tightened with emotion. I'm sorry, Wamba, Danso said softly. I didn't know. Wamba turned to him, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. It's okay. I don't need your pity, Danso. I just wanted you to see where I came from. They moved on, Wamba showing Danso the spots that had shaped his childhood. The underground brothel where Wamba had once spied on people for money. The market where his father had sung for coins. The last place he and Arewa lived before Kwame found them, and the places where he had played with the neighborhood children. Each place carried a piece of Wamba's past, and with each step, Danso felt the gap between their worlds slowly closing. As they walked through the marketplace, a group of Wamba's old friends spotted them. They were a ragtag bunch, dressed in tattered clothes, their faces weathered but smiling with warmth. One of them, a tall, handsome boy, called out to Wamba and ran over, throwing an arm around his shoulders. Wamba, it's been ages, the boy laughed, his grip on Wamba a little too tight for Danso's liking. You've forgotten about your old friends now that you're living up in that fancy palace as a prince. Don't even bother to check on us anymore, huh? Wamba grinned and hugged his friend back. Bisi, it's good to see you. Danso's eyes narrowed as he watched Bisi keep his arm draped around Wamba. Something about the way he touched Wamba made Danso's stomach twist with jealousy. The two exchanged stories and laughs, but Danso couldn't take his eyes off Bisi's hand resting on Wamba's shoulder. Wamba's friends soon suggested a game, a silly challenge where the loser would have to roll in the mud. Danso, still not quite fitting in, hesitated. But when Wamba paired up with Bisi, their playful banter and the thought of them standing close and touching as Danso had seen the other pairs do, sent a surge of jealousy through him. "I'll play," Danso said suddenly, his voice firm, cutting through the noise of the group. "I will pair with Wamba." Wamba turned to him, eyebrows raised in surprise. "You sure? You don't have to." Danso gave a determined nod. He wasn't about to let Bissy get too comfortable with Wamba, not if he could help it. The game began, messy and chaotic, and before long, Danso found himself covered in mud, much to the amusement of everyone, especially Wamba and his friends. Busy, however, didn't seem too bothered, still watching Wamba with familiarity that irked Danso to no end. Wamba, unable to hold back his laughter, stood doubled over, tears of mirth in his eyes as he looked at Danso, who was drenched from head to toe in mud. "You look ridiculous," Wamba said, giggling as he wiped his eyes, his entire face glowing with happiness. Danso, despite himself, rolled his eyes but couldn't help but smile. "I did it for you." Wamba's laughter softened, and he gazed at Danso with warmth and affection. "I know," he said, his voice quieter now, more tender. The closeness between them sent a flutter through Danso's chest, a feeling he wasn't used to but found himself craving more of. After the game, they sat around with Wamba's friends, sharing stories and jokes, the easy camaraderie surprising Danso. He had never hung around people like this before, so carefree, so down to earth. Normally, he would have looked down on them, but as the day wore on, he found himself thinking they weren't so bad. In fact, they were an okay bunch. And though Bissy's presence still nagged at him, Danso couldn't help but feel content in the moment. Wamba sat close to him, their legs brushing occasionally, and each small touch sent a spark of warmth through Danso. It wasn't just the game that had drawn them closer, it was the laughter, the shared experience, the way Wamba's smile seemed to brighten everything around him. "I'm glad I came today," Danso said softly, leaning slightly closer to Wamba. Wamba smiled, brushing a bit of dried mud from Danso's cheek. "Me too." As the day drew to a close, Wamba took Danso to one final place, the graves of his parents. The air grew still, the mood shifting as they stood before the small, simple markers. "These are my parents," Wamba said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "Mama, Papa, I just wanted you to know that I'm not alone anymore. Ariwa and I aren't alone." Wamba's voice cracked slightly as he continued, introducing Danso to his parents, his mother specifically because Wamba was glad his dad was gone. He spoke as though his mother was still there, listening. "I found someone I love, and I don't know if you'd approve, but he makes me so happy. He's a bit uppity." Wamba glanced at Danso with a playful smirk. "But he's a good person. He just pretends to be bad because that's what he thinks the world expects of him." Danso chuckled softly and gave Wamba a playful jab in the ribs, a smile tugging at his lips despite the emotional weight of the moment. But then Wamba's expression shifted, his voice growing serious and breaking a little as the sadness crept back in. "I miss you so much, Mama. I wish you could see Danso. He's so beautiful." At those words, tears welled up in Danso's eyes. His heart swelled with love for Wamba, but at the same time, it broke for the pain his love had endured. Gently, Danso reached out and wiped a tear from Wamba's cheek, his touch soft, filled with affection. "I'm sorry," Wamba whispered, his voice trembling. "I shouldn't have—" But before he could finish, Danso stopped him by pulling him into a tight embrace. "Don't apologize," he murmured against Wamba's shoulder. "I'm here." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of Wamba's past and the love they were building between them heavy in the air. No words were needed, just the warmth of their bodies pressed close, the comfort of knowing that they weren't alone anymore. As the sun began to set, they made their way back to the palace, their hearts fuller than they had been when the day began. The palace was quiet when they arrived, their footsteps echoing softly as they moved through the halls, their hearts heavy with the emotions of the day. There was a different energy between them now, something deeper, more intimate, born out of shared stories and unspoken understanding. Wamba's mind was still on the graves of his parents, the memories of his past, and the unexpected comfort he had found in Danso's presence. He stole a glance at Danso, who seemed equally lost in thought. Danso, too, was feeling the weight of the day. Seeing Wamba's life up close had opened his eyes in ways he hadn't anticipated. He realized just how much he had taken for granted: his wealth, his status, his privileges. And yet Wamba had endured so much and still managed to laugh, to love, to be so full of life. It made Danso love him even more. They reached Danso's room, and Wamba hesitated at the door. He wasn't supposed to stay, but something about leaving didn't feel right. The connection they had forged throughout the day had grown stronger, and neither of them wanted to part just yet. Without a word, Wamba stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Danso watched him, his heart racing. There was a quiet understanding between them, no need for explanations. They were both exhausted from the long day, but there was comfort in each other's presence, a need to be close. Wamba walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge, and Danso followed, sitting beside him. The room was dimly lit, the soft light from a lamp nearby casting gentle shadows on the walls. For a moment, they sat in silence, the quiet of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Wamba turned to Danso, his eyes soft and full of emotion. "Thank you for today," he whispered, "for coming with me, for seeing my world." Danso smiled, though his voice was filled with sincerity. "It's me who should be thanking you. I didn't know, I didn't understand, but now I do." Wamba's gaze dropped for a moment, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's funny," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I never thought I'd show anyone in my new world these parts of my life. I never thought I'd want to." Danso reached for Wamba's hand, his fingers brushing against Wamba's gently before he took his hand in his own. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Wamba looked up, meeting Danso's gaze, and for a moment they just stared at each other, the room filled with an unspoken connection. Slowly, Wamba leaned in, his forehead resting against Danso's. Their breaths mingled, the space between them disappearing as their hearts beat in sync. Wamba closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of Danso's presence wash over him, and in that moment, he realized just how much he had come to depend on this boy, this prince who had once been so distant, so arrogant, but now seemed to understand him in a way no one else ever had. "I love you," Wamba whispered, the words carrying a depth of meaning he hadn't expressed before. Danso's breath hitched, his heart swelling at the sound. Wamba had told him this before, but tonight it felt different, more real. A soft smile tugged at the corners of Danso's lips, his emotions so overwhelming that words failed him. Instead of speaking, he leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss against Wamba's lips. The kiss was soft and tender, a quiet recognition of all the emotions they shared, deepening the bond that had steadily grown between them since the day they first met. When they pulled apart, Wamba cupped Danso's chin, his eyes searching Danso's with a vulnerability that spoke of trust. "I'm ready," he whispered, his fingers brushing Danso's cheek with the gentlest of touches. "Are you?" Danso swallowed, emotions swirling through him like a storm at sea. He didn't need to speak. His nod was enough, a silent promise. A shared understanding passed between them, and in that moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet space they had created together. Wamba leaned in for another kiss, this time deeper, the moment heavy with all the love and tenderness they had carefully built. There was no urgency, no rush, just the steady rise of emotions that carried them closer. Wamba's hands moved along Danso's skin with care, each touch gentle yet filled with meaning, seeking permission, offering reassurance. It was as though his fingers could trace the love he felt, leaving an imprint of something lasting. Danso responded, his body instinctively finding its place closer to Wamba's. The warmth between them grew, their kisses slow, their hands wandering with purpose, exploring with a tenderness that wrapped them in a cocoon of quiet understanding. Wamba's calm confidence guided them both, soothing Danso's unspoken anxieties, while each touch became a promise of love and trust, unsaid yet profoundly clear. As they curled up together afterward, the room seemed to hum with the afterglow of their shared emotions. Wamba's arms enveloped Danso protectively, pulling him close, not just physically, but as if offering his heart as a safe harbor. Their bodies fit perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle, settling into the quiet intimacy they had found in each other. The steady rise and fall of their breathing became one, a soft, shared rhythm that mirrored the harmony of their hearts. In that stillness, there were no more uncertainties, no barriers, just the simple warmth of their love, growing stronger with every passing moment. In the silence that followed, no words were needed. It was a silence that spoke more than any language, a silent vow of trust, of devotion, and of comfort. As sleep gently claimed them, they knew that whatever life would bring, they would face it together, their bond now unshakable. What they had built was more than love. It was a connection that had rooted itself deep within their souls, a shared journey that bound them forever. The next morning, sunlight filtered into the room, casting a warm, golden glow over the bed where Wamba and Danso still lay, tangled in each other's arms. The night had passed in quiet contentment, the soft rhythm of their breathing the only sound in the room. Wamba was the first to stir, his eyes blinking open slowly. He felt the warmth of Danso's body pressed against his and smiled softly. The events of the previous night rushed back to him, and for a moment he just lay there, savoring the peacefulness of the moment. Gently, Wamba reached out, his fingers gently caressing Danso's face. He leaned down and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. Danso stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he looked confused, but then his gaze softened as he realized where he was and who he was with. "Good morning, beautiful," Wamba whispered, his voice tender. Danso smiled shyly, still waking up. "Morning." Wamba's fingers traced Danso's cheek, his touch light and affectionate. "Are you all right? I hope I didn't wear you out too much last night." "I was a little excited," he said, his voice filled with gentle concern. Danso's cheeks warmed slightly at Wamba's words, a wave of shyness washing over him. He tried to hide his face in the pillow, but Wamba wouldn't let him. With a teasing smile, Wamba pulled the pillow away, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Don't hide from me," Wamba said softly. Danso's heart swelled with emotion, and despite his initial embarrassment, he felt a deep sense of contentment. Last night had changed something between them, and though he wasn't used to feeling so vulnerable, there was a comfort in knowing that Wamba saw all of him and still loved him. "I'm more than all right," Danso murmured, his voice soft. "Last night was perfect." Wamba smiled, his heart swelling at Danso's words. "I'm glad," he whispered, leaning down to kiss him again, their lips meeting in a slow, tender kiss. For a long moment, they stayed like that, lost in each other's embrace, the world outside forgotten. But eventually, reality began to creep back in. Just as they were about to drift off again, the sound of a door creaking open broke the stillness of the morning. Both boys turned to see Kwame standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. Kwame stood frozen, his face a mixture of surprise and disbelief as he took in the sight of his son and Danso, wrapped in each other's arms. Of all the things he had expected, this was not one of them. The silence in the room was thick, and for a moment, none of them knew what to say. Wamba's heart pounded, a wave of guilt rushing over him. Slowly he sat up, his voice trembling as he broke the heavy silence. "Papa, please, say something." The fact that this was the first time Wamba had ever called Kwame Papa was not lost on either of them. Kwame's gaze flickered between the two boys, his lips pressed into a thin line. He struggled for words, finally managing to stutter. "I'm afraid if I speak," he said slowly, "I'll say something I'll regret." Without another word, he turned on his heel and quietly closed the door behind him, leaving the room in tense silence.